In this video, we're going to talk about imaginary numbers and how we can use them to extend the real number system to a larger system known as the complex number system. So we may not have a real solution to a quadratic equation, but we can try to extend our understanding by defining the square root of -1 as being I. Because right now, if we try to plug into our calculator some numbers, if we try to plug in like square root of -4, your calculator is simply going to say, hey, that's an error. You can't plug in the square root of a negative number. But if we split this up and we say this is the square root of -1 times the square root of 4, we would know that the square root of -1 is called I, and the square root of 4 is 2. So we get I times 2, or 2I. So it allows us to find some answers or solutions that we couldn't before otherwise. So we're going to apply this to some pieces here. If you try to just plug into your calculator the square root of -36, it's going to say error. So we're going to say, well, this is going to split up as being the square root of 36 times the square root of -1. That's the same thing as the square root of -36. And the square root of 36 is 6. While the square root of -1 is I. So some other quick ones, like the square root of -64. Square root of 64 is 8, and that negative makes it 8I. So we should be able to take some quick square roots of perfect square numbers. If they're negative, remember it's that number times I. We could also have something more complex under the root, like a -150. So obviously I can't plug in a negative number into my calculator. So we know we need to pull out an I for the square root of -1. And now what happens if you just take the square root of 150? Does it come out to be a perfect square, or does it give you a crazy decimal? It gives you an irrational decimal that keeps going on forever. So we're going to try to simplify it by pulling out a square number. So I'm going to do some prime factorization. I'm going to try to divide 150 by a prime number. I can divide by 2, 3, 5, 7. I could go up my prime numbers and try to see what could divide into there. So we can pick one, we can pick 2, 3, or 5, something like that. I'm going to start with maybe dividing by 3. 150 divided by 3 is 50. I'm going to try to take another prime number out of there. So maybe I could take out a 5. 5 goes into 50 10 times. I could pull out another 5. 5 times 2 would give me that 10. And now I can't pull anything out of 2 because 2 is prime. So now any pair is going to go on the outside. So I have a 5 that gets to go on the outside with that I. And anything not in a pair is going to remain under the square root. So under the square root, I'm going to have that non-pair, which is 2 times 3. 2 times 3 will give me 6. So I can pull out a 5, an I because of the negative, and then we have root 6 left over. And we're going to do additional examples, but this is just an introduction to imaginary numbers.